So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My name's Julia Smith. I'm one of the practitioners here at Remede Wellness. I'm here today to talk to you about gut health and microbiome, and this is one of my favourite areas to talk about. So the things that I'll cover today are what is the microbiome, why it's important to our health. I'll talk a little bit about what can go wrong and why. I'm going to talk about this really emerging space of the microbiome gut-brain axis and how important our microbiome and gut health is in terms of our mental health. We'll talk about pathology testing and cover some of the ways that we can look at your microbiome, and I'll give you some solutions for supporting your beneficial bacteria in the gut. So let's start with some fun facts, shall we? So, the microbiome that I'll talk about today is the gut microbiome, but we also have microbiome in other parts of the body. So the skin has its own microbiome. The word microbiome really just means an ecosystem or an ecology made up of different organisms on a microbial level. So a collection of different types of microbes. And, our skin, our lungs, our urogenital areas, all have their own different types of bacteria and different collection of organisms. So it's fascinating. Our whole body is made up of these organisms interacting with us, on us and in us all of the time. If you were to weigh, if it was possible to weigh all of those organisms, it would weigh up to 2 to 3 kilos. Now, to put that into perspective, that's about the same as the average human brain. So, when I think of the microbiome, I really think of it as being an organ in its own right. It has so many functions, from helping us to digest our food to actually supporting the production of vitamins such as vitamin K, even down to the immune response. So how our immunity evolves is largely down to what happens in the gut. We even know now that much of our serotonin is produced in the gut. So our gut-brain health connection is really important. I love this diagram. It's a really good explanation of how our gut microbiome interacts with other elements of what's happening in our body. So the top layer there of this diagram is the bacterial level of our gut. So that's the interior, if you like, of what's going through the gut. And you can see there that it's made up of commensal organisms, those normal bacteria that we see in the gut all of the time, pathogenic organisms, so the guys we don't want to see so much of, and probiotic organisms. So these are the ones that we consider to be beneficial. So below that barrier level, below the mucoid layer, we then have the immune response. Our barrier, the gut barrier, really does protect our immune system and the blood flow there from what's happening in the gut. If we experience leaky gut, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of, then leaky gut can mean that our immune response is upregulated because of being exposed to very minute particles, but things that our immune system wouldn't normally be exposed to. The nervous system that runs throughout our digestive tract is also impacted by the health of those organisms and the health of the integrity of that gut barrier. That's what the microbiome is. Let's think about what can go wrong. How is it affected? Before I talk about what can affect our gut bacteria, I wanted to introduce you to Glenda. So Glenda is a client of mine. I've been working with her for a while. So for the purpose of protecting her identity, Glenda is not her name, and this is not a photograph of the client. But when I met Glenda, she was 43 and she was experiencing fatigue, poor sleep. She had a lot of anxiety and problems with stress in her life. She also had this recurring skin condition which it sort of flared up here and there, and she couldn't really put her finger on whether it was related to certain foods or patterns in her life. She was terribly constipated, and this was something she'd been experiencing for years. She'd been using a lot of laxatives for many years and found it difficult to move her bowels regularly. She got a lot of bloating, abdominal pain, and she thought that maybe hormonal issues were going on. So that's how she came to me, and I'll talk to you through the process about how her symptoms have changed. Coming back to what can affect our good bacteria. So there are definitely medications that can affect our gut bacteria. We're probably aware of antibiotics. That's one people talk to me a lot about. And with antibiotics, you can take a probiotic to enhance your digestive health during a course of antibiotics. Heartburn and acid blocking medications. So the type of medications there, the antacids, Mylantas, Nexium, those sorts of things, their job is to impact the amount of acid that is produced in the gut. And we need acid for digestion. Laxatives, and I already mentioned that Glenda was someone who used laxatives quite a lot. So the use of laxatives can really change our beneficial flora makeup. That can impact the way our gut's working. The last one on the list there is interesting as well. Some of the antidepressant medication can also impact what happens in our gut. And that's something we're learning a lot more about these days. Let's talk about food and lifestyle and how we impact healthy bacteria through what we do every day. And we have to eat every day, it's very important, but what we eat and the quality of our food can really make a difference to what happens with our gut bacteria. I'm a big believer that the quality of our food is important. And if we can avoid highly processed foods, we're already likely to have less sugar and starch in our world. Cigarette smoking, we all know that smoking cigarettes isn't good for us, but it also can impact our gut bacteria and the health of our gut. Alcohol, amazing, isn't it? But alcohol, again, is one of those things we know innately is not our friend, and yet it also has an impact on the gut microbiome. And stress definitely impacts our gut. We all feel the effects of stress, and we sometimes feel the butterflies in the gut. So we know that there's a relationship there with our gut health and our levels of stress. So signs and symptoms, what can happen, what can we look out for that might be indications that our gut isn't particularly well? So the list on the right of the slide, these are, symptoms that we might expect from our gut. So bloating, gas, heartburn, abdominal pain, fluctuations in our bowel movements, and certainly reactions to certain foods. And this is a space that I hear a lot of patients initially present, saying things like, well, Julia, I don't know what to eat anymore. Sometimes I feel like eggs affect my gut. Sometimes I eat eggs and I feel okay. Sometimes I feel like maybe it's garlic. And so I sometimes receive patients who have tried lots of different diets, but not really had the results that they're looking for. And this is a common presentation, and sometimes food isn't the enemy. Sometimes food intolerances are a part of the picture, but not always. Sometimes we can improve the responses to foods purely by working on gut health. So that's the right-hand side of the slide. If you look at the left, some of those symptoms might be things that you don't necessarily straight away think of when you talk of gut health. So vaginal thrush or oral thrush, we might not necessarily think of that as being related to gut health, but it is and it can be. Skin conditions. I often see skin conditions that resolve when we treat the gut health. Allergies, brain fog, mood disorders, dysregulation with our nervous system and brain health are areas that we often don't correlate with gut health, but it is an area we're finding a lot more about and comes back to the microbiome gut-brain axis. So let's dive into the microbiome gut-brain axis. Again, at the UWA symposium, I heard about a great piece of research involving mice. What the researchers did to really explore the connection between the gut, the microbiome, and what happens in the brain was they took two groups of mice. The first group was exposed to a fearful environment, and the second group had their microbiome stripped. So they had essentially a virgin gut with no microbiome in it. They then took an extract of the microbiome of the fearful group and popped it into the gut of the mice who had a virgin gut. And what they found was that the previously not fearful group who had no reason to be fearful, they hadn't been exposed to big cats or frightening experiences, suddenly started to exhibit symptoms of anxiety and depression. Those symptoms looked like isolating themselves. They took themselves away from the group. They became very easily anxious at noises or change in lighting. Those symptoms indicated to the researchers that the microbiome change had a relationship with the anxiety levels and what was happening in the brain of those experimental mice. It's fascinating, isn't it? Really interesting to think that what happens in our gut is really influencing what happens in our brain. The connection between our gut and our brain is split second, and that's our vagal nerve in action. So our vagal nerve connects our brain to our gut. And on its journey, it passes through organs like the heart, the spleen. It's one of our biggest nerves. You're probably aware of it, you've probably come across it already. The tone of our vagal nerve is super important to how our brain receives the messages from our body, and therefore how it gives the messages out as well. 80% of that communication across the vagal nerve is actually from the microbiome to the brain, not the other way around. You know what, I think it's really easy to think that the brain is doing most of the work, is doing the control, but the microbiome is really telling the brain about the experience of the body. Therefore, a healthy gut means that we're more likely to have a healthy brain. And how we eat influences the diversity of our flora. You know, going back to that image, the diversity and the richness and that picture of the forest that we talked about, we're talking here about how that looks and how that impacts the health of our gut. This is research in obesity. So what they looked at here was actually a twin study, and obviously twins having the same genetic background, they're able to observe what happens when the diet is different. What was discovered was that people were more likely to have obesity and be overweight if they had a higher amount of firmicutes. So firmicutes and bacteroidetes are two of the families of bacteria in the gut. And we measure this when we look at people's microbiome. So when they had the higher levels of firmicutes, it was shown that they were more likely, or it was associated with obesity. And given that their genetics were the same, and other things remained the same, looking at the diversity of their microbiome was a part of that picture. So this is one of the reasons why we look at these two families of bacteria when we examine them. How can you find out what's happening to your gut bugs? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the testing that we do here at Remede. But one that I really like is called complete microbiome mapping. So the complete microbiome mapping allows us to look at all of the richness and diversity in the gut. So firstly, it tells us about functional markers. So these functional markers help us to understand how the organs and tissues in the digestive tract are working. It gives us a real picture of inflammation in the gut, which is really important. We want to know if there's pain, where that pain is coming from, and what we might be able to do about that. It helps us to understand about the output of digestive enzymes and pancreatic health. We look here at the secretory IgA, so we actually get to see whether the immune system of the gut is being impacted by those high stress levels or perhaps by food intolerances. So it gives us clues as to what's happening in the tissues of the gut. It can tell us about detoxification in the gut. It can tell us about the integrity of that gut barrier, and is there likelihood of leaky gut going on here, and what can we do to support that. It also tells us about infections. So some of those things we don't want to see in the gut. So things like worms, viruses, bacterial pathogens, yeasts and fungi. We examine those through this test. Of course, in this test, we absolutely look at the probiotics as well. So we get a picture of the beneficial flora and many of the different species and strains, and understand how we can best impact the health of the gut. We also look at the short-chain fatty acids, and it's one of the areas I love looking at because it really tells me how this person is eating. Are they getting enough fibre? And this is where food as medicine can come in treatment in terms of helping this person to eat different range of fibre, different types of fibre. Is it more vegetables they need or more nuts and seeds, so that they can create the short-chain fatty acids and really feed the bacteria in their gut in the best way possible. I love using food as medicine. It makes so much sense to me. So speaking of food as medicine, let's talk about some real-life solutions. So we're going to talk about prebiotics first. So prebiotics you may have heard about. Prebiotics are essentially the foods or substances that will feed your probiotics. So it's the fuel for your healthy bacteria. And yes, prebiotics can come in the shape of supplements, and there are some great ones that we recommend here at Remede, but there are also some really cool foods that you can eat that enhance your probiotics in your gut. I particularly like things like artichokes. They're unusual, they're quite cool. Asparagus, nuts and seeds, different types of nuts. Resveratrol is a really interesting one too. Resveratrol is what we would consider a polyphenol. So, you know, we're learning more in more recent years about how polyphenols are a prebiotic. So they feed those good bacteria. So polyphenols come from the bright colours in food. So resveratrol comes from the red wine grape. Polyphenols also come from blueberries, blackberries. Think of the purple foods, the bright coloured foods. We get polyphenols from capsicum, carrots, particularly those beautiful heirloom carrots that have different colours. I'm loving at the moment pomegranates. It's May right now in Perth and the pomegranates are in season. My pomegranates are going crazy. They're not huge, but they're beautiful when you eat them. And pomegranates are an amazing polyphenol. They feed and help to provide prebiotics to our good bacteria, but they also help to keep parasites at bay. So the seed of the pomegranate has the ability to be anti-parasitic. So it's a lovely kind of all-in-one supplement that you can get from nature. So you know, think about how you might include some of these foods into your diet if you feel that this is something you want to improve. Probiotics. So there are probiotic foods. Yes, there are lots of probiotic supplements on the market. There are good, there are bad, there are somewhere in the middle. The most important thing with a probiotic supplement is that it's the right one for you at the right time. You know, I hear often, again, patients come to me saying, oh, well, I've used probiotics. I tried this one, I tried that one, or my friend was using this one and she said it was good, so I tried it and it just actually made me feel a bit more bloated. That's because probiotics are very species specific and strain specific. When you're talking about probiotics, we get to that sort of degree of specificity as well. So lactobacillus, for example, there are many different lactobacillus. Which strain you use is specific to the condition. So we would use a certain strain for immune health, or for reducing inflammation in the gut, or for helping to repopulate the gut after antibiotic. What works for one person, for one condition, isn't necessarily going to be good for another at another time. It's really important to be guided by someone who has experience, expertise in the use of probiotic supplements is my best advice there. But when we think of probiotic foods, there's lots you can do. Things like kefir. Kefir is a lovely way to do that. So kefir is a light yogurt, fermented milk, if you like. You can buy kefir pre-made. You can make it at home. It's not that hard. Yogurt, you know, that's one of the probiotic foods that we've known about for a long time. Pickled foods. So anything that's been fermented or pickled can have a probiotic nature to it. Things like olives, fermented foods. So I'm thinking here of kimchi, sauerkraut, that sort of thing can have a probiotic benefit to the gut. Kombucha, apple cider vinegar, all of these are quite easily available and quite helpful. What I will say is if you notice that when you start to introduce these probiotics to your diet, If you start to feel that your symptoms worsen, then that's a good time to seek some help from a natural health practitioner, because if you're taking in a lot of these fermented foods, you could also be feeding yeasts and fungi in the gut that thrive on these foods. So again, the guidance of a natural health practitioner can be the right thing to do. So moving to postbiotics. Postbiotics essentially are the production or the output of our healthy bacteria as a result of the prebiotic and probiotics that they've consumed. It's the short chain fatty acids that we talked about when we saw that beautiful slide. So choosing that variety of fibre, getting around 30 grams of fibre in your day is ideally the way to promote the production of postbiotics and the health of your gut integrity. I'm coming to the end here, but really wanted to point out that the research in microbiome health and how the microbiome impacts overall health and well-being and other systems of the body is ever going to be evolving. We know so much more than we ever did. The ability to take a stool test and examine the DNA in our microbiome is remarkable to me. We couldn't do that when I first started studying. We knew that it would be possible at some point in the future, but it's absolutely amazing to be able to do it now. And so in another 20 years, I can't even imagine where we'll be, but our knowledge about the microbiome is growing rapidly. So, I do think watch this space, work with a natural health practitioner to enhance your knowledge, and make sure they're someone who, constantly enhances their own knowledge too. So I wanted to come to an end here on this point, and also to reconnect you with Glenda. So when I think about all of the things that I've helped Glenda with, or that we've explored throughout her treatment, it's been a lot about food and lifestyle and how she could help herself. We changed her relationship with medications. She's no longer using laxatives at all, which is amazing, given that she'd used them for over 20 years. She's got her health of her bowel regulated really through her diet and lifestyle. She's exercising more because she's got more energy. She's managing her stress levels differently. So the food that she eats, she really sees as medicine. One of the things I love about working with Glenda is that every time I see her, and it's not very often anymore, it's probably every 3 months that we just do a quick catch up over Zoom, she always asks me, what food can I try now? In our last conversation, she had already started to bring in more diversity of fruits and vegetables. She was less cautious to do that, which is interesting because at the very beginning she was certain that food was the enemy. And so now she's very happy to bring in new foods and explore how they help her gut. So in our last conversation, we talked about bringing in pomegranates and figs because they're seasonal, they're polyphenols, they're very healthful for the gut. So, that enrichment of her nutrition, but also that enrichment of her microbiome is really coming through food as medicine. She's exercising more. She tells me, I love going to Pilates. It's now my thing. In fact, I would go every day if I could. She walks frequently. Her weight is under control. She doesn't have that bloating that she used to have, and she sleeps so much better. And all of that has given her a better stress resilience. So she's more able to cope with work. And she says, I have the energy for work. I have the energy for life. It no longer feels like hard work. Yes, I rest. Yes, I take care of myself, but I have the energy for life. I have the energy for work that I really wanted. And, that's a real joy. And it's really been through her dedication to the treatment and to, exploring what she could do with diet and lifestyle. So I would encourage you to reach out to your natural health practitioner. If it's one of the practitioners here at Remede, I'm sure they would love to investigate your gut health if they haven't already. If it's been done for you maybe a year ago, it's really good to repeat that and really see where your gut is at now and to enhance the treatment that might have been done before. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Obviously, feel free to contact me on my email or the phone number, and I'd love to meet you here in Remede if you need some help. Thanks so much for joining me.